Yeah. Blackjack. Life is like a game of cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother. Most people would come to the conclusion, based on conspiracy theories of what they've read in the media or what they've seen in a movie or a television show or a documentary, that Faith Evans being with Tupac had something to do with his death, Biggie Smalls, or even Sean Puffy Combs, or maybe even Suge Knight, with all of the speculation that surrounded what happened that night in Las Vegas. But I'm here to tell you that none of those accusations could be made. None of those altercations or interactions could have happened if it wasn't for the night of November 18th, 1993. Now, most people might say, well, why do you say that? You see, most artists are inspired from the most difficult times in their lives. And Tupac Shakur was no different. And the night that he met Ayanna Jackson was one of the best nights of his life, as well as the worst night of his life. Because the days to come would prove pivotal, dangerous, and in some ways biblical. Me personally, I don't know who shot Tupac Shakur on September 7th, 1996. But I'll take it from Keefe D, who actually admitted it in Murder Rap, the DVD movie, and also on Vlad TV, as well as in his book, which I bought, and it's a great read, that his nephew, Orlando Anderson, was the shooter of Tupac Shakur. But I want to say that being the person responsible for Tupac's death and the person who shot him are two different things. And none of these incidents ever happened. None of the hate, the East and West Coast feud, hit him up, him meeting Faith Evans, him having the situations and altercations with Biggie on various occasions prior to his death. They never happened if not for the night of November 18th, 1993. Tupac, upon meeting Ayanna Jackson, the night that he met her would be the best night and the worst night of his life. And you say to yourself right now, well, how could you say it would be the best night of his life? From a creative standpoint, if you paid attention to what he left us in his legacy of his work, then you understand what I'm saying. Follow me. The November 29th, 1994 quad studio shooting of Tupac Shakur and the November 18th, 1993 situation involving Ayanna Jackson are interwoven, not because of the people who are alleged to be involved, but because of the timeline and the historical facts that would lead up to Tupac's demise. And you must pay attention as the feelings and everything that goes into play here come about that leads up to him being shot on September 7th, 1996. Let me start off by the worst part in reference to meeting Ayanna Jackson. You see, Tupac Shakur on November 29th, 1994, in that day, in that time, is not in New York to be shot at Quad Studios or to be called by anybody to appear on a song at that particular day, in that particular time, if not for the situation on November 18th, 1993, involving Ayanna Jackson making false accusations in reference to Tupac. You see, Tupac was in New York to go to court for that case, among other reasons, but mainly to go to court for that case. And therefore, that puts him in touch with people, allowing them to know his location, where he was at, and what he was doing, as it was also televised and publicized in various newspapers at that particular time. So it is a fact that the false allegations that Ayanna Jackson made against Tupac allowed the November 29th, 1994 Quad Studio shooting to take place knowingly or unknowingly by Ayanna Jackson, based on the fact that Tupac had to be in court in New York to defend himself against those false allegations. That is a fact. It is also a fact that up until that date, November 29th, 1994, all was well between Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace, a.k.a. the Notorious B.I.G., as Tupac had said that Biggie and them had been to the hotel where he was staying, where the alleged incident happened with Ayanna Jackson sometime earlier that week or earlier that day. And that came up in the court case in which Tupac had talked about Biggie and them had allegedly left some guns or something like that in his hotel room, and he was actually charged with those too, but those charges were dismissed, and he wasn't convicted of those because his fingerprints weren't on the guns. It is also a fact that the feelings, emotions, paranoia, speculation, and all of the things that Tupac felt were directly related to the situation involving him having to be in New York to attend the court case where he was falsely accused by Ayanna Jackson. So after the Quad Studio shooting, this is when the beef and all of the disenchantment takes place between Biggie, Puffy, Bad Boy, and the whole 9 yards. If not for Tupac being in New York having to attend that court case, none of those feelings, emotions, the shooting, or none of that happens on that particular day and at that particular time. That is once again a fact. Follow me. You must remember, it was one day after the jury began deliberating that Tupac Shakur was shot at Quad Studios. And this on February 7th, 1995, upon him being sentenced, Tupac would then implement the biblical start of something that would have historical and monumental effects until this very day, when Tupac told the judge, and I quote, after the judge had said what he said and describing what he thought Tupac had did, in which Tupac was innocent of, Tupac said, quote, "You never used the wisdom of Solomon. I always felt you had something against me." He said this to the judge in his case before being sentenced after 4.5 years in prison. You now understand the fact that if Tupac Shakur is not in New York defending himself against false allegations from Ayanna Jackson, then Tupac never gets shot at Quad Studios on November 29th, 1994. And then after Tupac is sentenced on February 7th, 1995, and is now in prison, Tupac would never misinterpret or misunderstand the song "Who Shot Ya" by Biggie, and thinking that Biggie was referring to him being shot at Quad Studios. You see, it's all interwoven. From that one false allegation, the rippling effect. But Tupac has now already imputed the biblical implications in dealing with the judge by him being in prison and dealing with the young lady Ayanna Jackson and what he stated in referencing the judge not actually seeing the truth or wanting to know or hearing the truth, that he was innocent. Now let's fast forward to October 12th, 1995, in which the months in between that, while Tupac was in prison, Tupac felt that nobody was trying to help him. His record company wouldn't put up the bail money in regards to him getting out. Tupac would be presented with an opportunity of a lifetime that he probably normally wouldn't have taken, but due to desperation and taking care of his family and trying to get out of prison, on that day and time would sign a contract with Death Row Records that he wouldn't have not otherwise signed if he wasn't in jail for false allegations related to Ayanna Jackson. If you compound that with the fact that Tupac was in jail for a crime that he didn't commit, and while defending himself in that process being shot at Quad Studios, and then having to defend himself against allegations that he was assaulted in jail, then having to address the fact that, you know, the Who Shot Ya song, him thinking that it was about him, on that day in time, Tupac would have never signed to Death Row had he not been in jail for a crime that he didn't commit. But put into that situation, Tupac did what was best for him and what he thought would be best for his family. He signed to Death Row. But once again, he would never have signed with Death Row or never had to sign to Death Row if not being accused of a crime and convicted of a lesser crime in which he didn't commit. It's all interwoven. From November 18th, 1993, involving the situation with Ayanna Jackson, the shooting on November 29th, 1994 at Quad Studio, the sentencing and the biblical implications on February 7th, 1995, in dealing with being sentenced in that case. And here we come to October 12th, 1995, where he would then be signed to Death Row Records. Most people would ask me, how could you say that there's a positive side in dealing with Ayanna Jackson? And that's where I would say, well, it really has nothing to do with Ayanna Jackson and being positive, and has more to do with Tupac Shakur not giving up, turning lemons into lemonade, not letting that situation curb his enthusiasm, and taking a short-term loss and turning it into a long-term gain, if you will. You know the saying that said, you know, a temporary setback in favor of a long-term gain. And that's what Tupac exemplified, not just with his words, but with his actions. In one of his songs, he says, if you can make it through the night, there's a brighter day. So from that perspective, that's how I relate that to that being interwoven into that situation. Because look at it from this perspective. Tupac never signs to Death Row if he's not in jail for the false allegations alleged by Ayanna Jackson. He never gets shot in New York on the 29th. He never, like I said, once again, goes to jail. And also, when you take it, him getting out of prison and dealing with the whole situation of being shot in New York, the anger, the frustration, the motivation, and the drive that he had and what he was feeling, whether it was right or wrong, the revenge, the get back, and feeling like he had to, you know, do what he had to do, he did that. So on that side, when I say positive, I mean we have no hit 'em up. We have no Tupac meeting Faith Evans and having sex with her on October 19th, 1995. And therefore, there's never a hit 'em up written with that explosive first few words in there that is that makes it now the #1 diss song of all time. There's no All Eyes on Me. There's no Machiavelli album. There's no Gridlock. There's no Gang Related. There's none of the other creative things that Tupac did, and not letting that situation determine his future. Even though he was wronged, he turned that situation into a historical event. And so with that being exemplified, I take that being a friend of his, and like I said, because I was with him the night that he met Faith Evans, and we had talked about him just getting out of prison and what it meant to him. And I seen the look on his face. And so from that perspective, when you think about that, it was monumental. And like I said, without that court case in New York, Tupac doesn't go to jail. And not only does he not get shot the first time in New York, but let's be honest, him signing the death row, after that, he wouldn't have got shot in Vegas either. He wouldn't have got shot on September 7th, 1996, on that day and time. And on that day and time, on September 13th, 1996, Tupac wouldn't have died. But, like I said, God had other plans. And that's the biblical aspect of it. You see, it was destiny. It had nothing to do with what you or I thought should be right. It was his destiny. Straight game.